You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you are listening to your favorite international podcast. Welcome to all the Fresh Hell rookies, your first-time listeners out there. We are so happy you're here and you found us.
We are, and welcome back to all of our experienced listeners. Sounds like something you need training for, this podcast. You've made it. You've stuck it out. No, but we really do appreciate everything that you do and your ongoing support. We would not still be doing this podcast without you, that's for sure. If it was still just my sister and my dad being forced to listen to this every week, there's just no way. And of course, we want to send a special shout out to our newest Patreon members, and they are Casey Krinsky, Nicolette Herberger, Sandy, and Victoria Rodriguez. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, Spooky Fuckery Month is officially over. We hope you enjoyed October as much as we did. And now that we made it to November, our content is going back to the normal trifecta of murder, mystery, and the macabre. And we will start off by a two-parter about horrible, horrible murders. In this episode, we will be talking about the disappearance of a child, a young boy, and how everything is connected to the murders. We'll have to wait for the second part next week. If you watch the movie Changeling from 2008, not the horror movie The Changeling, it's a very important difference there, that one is from 1980. I'm talking about Changeling, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Angelina Jolie. Then you will be familiar with this case. We are talking about the disappearance of Walter Collins and the Wineville chicken coop murders.
This is a big one. This is a really big one. And this case is not only... it's so many cases we do are like this, where it's not only sad, it's also really infuriating, right? But they'll see soon enough. All right, let's start at the beginning with a man named Walter Joseph Anson Collins. He was born on the 1st of February, 1890, Groundhog Eve, in Omaha, Nebraska, to John W. Anson and his wife, Delia. At one point, Walter moved to Los Angeles, where he started to work for a streetcar company. But that was not all he did. I don't know what happened there, if he used the work at his company as just a cover-up, because he was also something of a con man and a robber. And what he would do was he would hold up streetcars and rob the conductors and the passengers. Also, the last name Collins was a pseudonym that he used. At least that's what some of the source material says. The other thing we could think of is maybe his father died when he was still a boy, maybe his mother remarried, and that's where the Collins part of the name came from. It doesn't really matter, we're just not entirely certain about the veracity of that name.
There's so much with this man, like his occupations changes all the time. Like sometimes he's listed as working for the streetcar company, another time as a cook, and yeah, it's...
Well, it comes up a lot that this time in history was a good time to start a new life or create a new identity, because photo IDs weren't really a thing. There were no computers tracking your every move, so... It's even hard, and I think we've mentioned this before, even when there's nothing nefarious going on. Like, I think I mentioned that when you do family tree stuff, it's like, even names are like a game of telephone, where you thought this person's name was this, and you knew them when they were alive, and you always thought this was their name, but nope, turns out you've seen their birth certificate, and they just never used that name. I feel like that doesn't happen anymore. You know what I mean? Anyway. So it's 1910, so when he was around the age of 20, he was charged for 4 robberies and was fined $180 and sentenced to 10 years in prison, but he was granted parole and didn't serve the entire sentence. In 1915 or 1916, he met a woman named Christine Ida Dunn. Christine was 1.5 years older than Walter. She was born on the 14th of December, 1888, in Alameda County, California. Her father was Francis Dunn, an Irish immigrant, and his wife Clara, who was from England. The family had at least one more child, a girl, Amy Grace, who was born in 1893. The family moved from California to Hawaii and later on to Seattle, where they settled for good. I don't know how you make that move. I don't know how you go to Hawaii and then you're like, you know what? It's just not rainy or chilly enough here. I just need some more fog in my life. There must be a story, but anyhow.
Well, if you're from Ireland and England.
Oh, that's true. It felt more like home, probably.
Yeah.
I've heard only fantastic things about Seattle, so I'm not giving Seattle any grief. You're just known for your raininess. Anyhow, Christine decided to head back to California, the state where she was born, and there she took up a management position for a telephone company.
Yeah, and so if you watched Changeling, you might remember Angelina Jolie rolling around on roller skates in the phone company's office, and it seems as if she was in charge of the phone operators or switchboard operators, or, as they were called in German, das Fräulein vom Amt, which roughly translates to young lady from the office, meaning the postal or phone office. Man, did I go down a rabbit hole. If you don't want to hear me talk for a couple of minutes about the history of phone companies, please skip maybe the next 5 minutes or so. Because first of all, I wanted to know if Christine possibly wore roller skates at work.
Yeah, you don't think of roller skates as being a job.
Yeah, unless you work for Sonic or something.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're working at a car hop and whatever, but otherwise, roller skates just... It's wild.
So yeah, these kind of positions really existed back then because there were these long lines of switchboards, and as the switchboard manager, you needed to be able to move fast from one end of the switchboard to the other, if needed, if there was a problem. And also during night shift, when there were fewer callers, there were the so-called teleskater girls, because they could operate a wider space of switchboard all alone, because they were on roller skates. Second of all, I really wanted to know why it was almost exclusively women who worked as switchboard operators. For all of our younger audience who might not know what switchboards were.
You are aware. I feel it's important to let everyone know that we also did not live through the switchboard era. We're not that. We're not
they
there
existed
yet.
Until the 70s, so.
Well, I guess that's true.
Also, I feel like I did. I don't know. I feel closer to the 1920s than to the 2020s. I don't know what's going on there.
Kids today are just never going to get the frustration of having a friend with lots of zeros in the number on a rotary phone with when you're second to last number and you get one wrong and you have to start all over again.
Kids nowadays will never understand the frustration of having a party line where you have to wait for your neighbor to hang up so that you can call your friends asking what the homework assignment is.
Yeah, we had friends. We never had a party line, but we had friends that had a party line. They lived up the street, and I spent a lot of time there as a kid. And if I had $1 for every time I picked up their phone to call home real quick, but there were other people talking on the line, and there was just some kid oh, sorry, and hanging up, you probably could have funded my college education. It was so awkward. It was oh, sorry.
If you are around the age of 20 nowadays, you have not experienced a time without mobile phones. And I think switchboards are still somewhat more relatable to people who only had landlines available growing up. I don't know, it's just
definitely
my feeling.
Especially before call waiting.
I mean, seriously, 5 years or so ago, I was sitting in a waiting room of a doctor's office, waiting for my appointment. And in walks an elderly man, and the receptionist, she was maybe 18 to 20 years old, young girl. She starts talking to him and she says, "Oh, you know what? I wanted to call you yesterday to confirm your appointment, but I think you made a mistake while writing down your number. It looks so weird because it starts with a 01. Which, if you are used to landlines, you know that 01 is the area code for landlines in Vienna. The receptionist had never seen a landline number, and I was absolutely blown away by that realization.
Yeah, that makes me feel very old.
Right?
So old.
But it could be worse, and I'm telling you in a second why.
Oh yeah. Okay.
For those of you who don't know, back in the early days of phone lines, you would pick up the earpiece of your phone box, and this would connect you to the operator, and you would tell them by speaking into the mouthpiece that was fixed to the phone box who you wanted to call. And there in front of the switchboard was Mame trying to connect you to Mr. Applewhite, for example. It's a job I could never have done, because it looks incredibly confusing, difficult, and yes, very stressful. So, and then I checked why switchboard operators were mostly women. And what I used to think was that it was due to World War I, right? Because that's when phone companies really took off, but it's also the time when many men were off fighting and dying in the war. But I was wrong. This was already a thing before the Great War. It started in the late 1880s that phone companies started to hire women as operators because they realized that they were able to pay women less, and still women were way more polite and friendly to the callers than men. So yeah, that's a piece of phone trivia for you. Also, and that's what I meant when I said it could be worse with the phone companies, what I did not know was that in the beginning, when there were more than one phone companies in an area, you could often only call people who were signed up with the same phone company. So only businesses used to have contracts with more phone companies, but because they needed to be able to call different people, right? But for private homes, you wanted to call your mom, and if she was not with the same operator or the same provider, you couldn't call her. I think that's interesting.
It is interesting. I actually have a gold charm bracelet. My great aunt Marguerite, who was my mother's sister, she worked for Bell Systems. She was a telephone operator. And I have this really cool, she got it when she retired. And it's just this, like, I'm sure it's gold plated, but it's got a little charm on it with a bell. And then there are 2 teeny little diamond chips, one for each 25 years of service. So she'd worked for them for 50 years when she retired.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And also one of my last names is Bell. That was my late husband's name. So I used to wear it all the time. So it's a fun little keepsake from that time period. Yeah. So Christine Dunn, she worked at one of these phone companies, and then she met Walter Anson, who had already been released from prison. He introduced himself as Walter Collins, and the two probably fell in love and got married in 1916. From all we know, it looks as if Christine had no idea of Walter's criminal past. After they got married, they moved into a house located at 209 North Ave 23 in Lincoln Heights, which is the oldest suburb in Los Angeles, founded in the 1830s. On September 23, 1918, their son, Walter Conrad Collins, was born. Unfortunately, the marriage to Christine and the birth of their son didn't stop Walter Sr. from his criminal behavior, and it's in September of 1923 that he is arrested, charged with 8 counts of first-degree robbery, first degree because he was armed, and sentenced to 40 years at Folsom Prison. Christine was now a single mom, making ends meet with her supervisor position, and I think they had a comfortable life. It seems like they were doing okay. Of course, she often would have to work, and with Christine's family living in Seattle, we assume she must have had someone in the neighborhood who would maybe help out by looking after the young boy, because, remember, he was only 5 when his father went to prison.
Also, it takes a village.
It does. It really does. And also, probably Walter Jr. was a responsible and fairly self-sufficient kid, right? Because that's how things go. When you're...
I mean, remember when we were kids and we had, like, to be home alone for a few hours in the afternoon.
Exactly.
I think it teaches you, or it taught us to be, like, kind of responsible and...
Yeah. Not at age 5, obviously, but yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I don't think she left him alone at age 5, though.
No. I don't think so either. And so the years pass, everything is just fine until it isn't. It's always the way, isn't it? It was the 10th of March, 1928, which was a Saturday. Christine Collins was heading to work, but before she left the house, she handed her son some money so that he could go to the movies later that day. Who knows, maybe he wanted to watch The Legion of the Condemned, starring Fay Wray and Gary Cooper, because it was released that day. Around 5 p.m., Walter was seen by the neighbors at the corner of Pasadena Avenue and North Avenue 23. He was probably on his way to a nearby movie theater. When he was seen with a plaid lumber jacket, dark brown long pants, black shoes with a low heel, like regular old shoes, and a gray cap. And that's about it. Because when Christine returned home from work later that evening, Walter was nowhere to be found. Was he still at the movies? Had he met a friend on his way home and lost track of time, playing somewhere in the neighborhood? And so, of course, Christine starts to look around and try to find her son.
I don't think she was too alarmed at first, right?
No, I don't think so either. There wouldn't have been. You remember being that age, right? He was a 9-year-old out on a Saturday evening. He had money in his pocket to go see the movies. Maybe he stayed and watched another film. The problem was Christine didn't find Walter. She asked the people in the neighborhood. I don't know if that's when she maybe learned that someone had in fact seen him around 5 p.m. or whether that came up later when the investigation was taking place. But the important thing is that he wasn't home and he didn't show up in any of the places where she might have expected to find him. And so now we can all imagine that just sick, sinking feeling you get in the pit of your stomach, right? When you're worried that something is just really wrong. And I think most of us have experienced that feeling. I think for most people, it gets resolved soon enough once they learn something totally benign has happened.
Yeah.
Flat tire, got caught up, lost track of time.
Yeah, phone died, ran out of battery, something like this.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, that's not what happened in this case. Now, I think official reports stated that Christine reported Walter missing 2 days later. And I saw a video where people talked about that case and they were shocked. They even mentioned that she reported him missing 5 days later, and that's absolutely not true. Don't believe that if you hear it. And they were shocked, why didn't she report him sooner? And why didn't she report him immediately when he was missing? Now, I don't think that's fair judgment. I think she actually did try to report him missing immediately once she realized that she couldn't find him. But the police told her that they won't file a report just because a young boy has been missing for a couple of hours. I remember in the movies the police does show up the next day to file a report and to take her statement. I'm not sure, so it was either the next day or it was 2 days later. Look, I know it's different times, and thankfully nowadays you can report a child as missing immediately.
You can report it. I don't know that they'll always, even to this day, depending on where you are and what the circumstances are, you know. But up until the 70s, parents really were told, sorry, you're just going to have to wait. You know, kids will be kids. Maybe they ran off. Maybe they did this. It was absurd to think that you would report a child missing and then be told that you would have to wait somewhere between 24 and 72 hours before the police would do anything about it, right? I think, and I'm not totally sure if it's the Eaton Patz case. I think it was the Patz case, and then, of course, Adam Walsh, right? Just 2 years later, that really changed things, here at least, where all of a sudden there was too much publicity, and law enforcement they couldn't just say, oh, they ran off, or kids will be kids, or, you know.
And time is so important in those cases. You can't just wait 5 days. Yeah.
Well, especially now. We know more now, right? But, yeah, it was not great.
But it was different times, and maybe Christine also had to face some prejudice because she was a working single mom, and also probably because, her husband was in prison for 8 counts of robbery, armed robbery.
Oh, yeah.
But I also think now is the time that we talk about why the LAPD was highly problematic back in those days. And I will only talk about it briefly because it's a lot. And if you want to take a deep dive, I recommend books like, for example, To Protect and to Serve, the LAPD's Century of War in the City of Dreams by Joe Dominic. I have to say one thing, though, I haven't read the whole book yet, just the passages that were of interest to me, which is the kind of L.A. Noire period up until the early 1950s.
Yeah, and following that, if you haven't seen, the ESPN did a really, really good, it's actually a multi-part series about the O.J. Simpson trial, but they get very heavily into the history of the LAPD and the often very problematic history of the LAPD, which is fascinating, and yeah, I would recommend that if you want further reading. But we're way before that.
Yeah, way before that. There was a lot going on. And
a lot. Yeah.
You have to understand that the 1920s were a time of fast growth for LA. It was the beginning of the golden age of Hollywood, or back then it was still, the sign did say Hollywood Land, up until, I think, 1940 something, which was the name of a housing development, by the way, so it's not that glamorous. Many people who wanted to work in the film business flocked to the City of Angels. Between 1920 and 1929, the population more than doubled from roughly 500,000 to 1.2 million in only 9 years. And there was a lot of money to be made with movies. Also, don't forget, these were the years of prohibition. Mobsters took over control of the city, and you'd think that the police were there to serve and protect LA citizens. Unfortunately, that was not entirely the case. Even though the so-called Vice Squad was formed. You know, they were focusing on gambling, bootlegging, and so on. There was also a Red Squad, which I found shocking because they would go after labor unions.
Oh, yeah.
You know, people who fought for workers' rights. In 1926, a man named James Edgar Two Guns Davis, that was his nickname, became chief of the LAPD, and he formed a 50-man strong gun squad to quote him, quote, hold court on gunmen in the Los Angeles streets. I want them brought in dead, not alive, and will reprimand any officer who shows the least mercy to a criminal, end quote. And also, quote, the gun-toting element and the rum smugglers are going to learn that the murder and gun-toting are most inimical to their best interest, end quote. So now you know why he had the nickname Two Gun.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you could think that's a good thing, right? Really going all in against violent criminals. The only problem was that it gave the police too much freedom, especially those who were in with the mobsters. You know, corruption was rampant among law enforcement at the time.
Yeah, the rules really need to apply to everybody. Otherwise, they're not really useful rules, are they? Yeah. So this bit is from squaremile.com. There was an article titled, quote, How Crime and Corruption Built Modern Los Angeles. And it continues, quote, in the early part of the 20th century, Los Angeles seemed like many other large American cities on the rise. Corruption and vice came with the territory. What made LA different was how new it was, its topography, the omnipresent car, and Hollywood. The car made a big difference. Other cities had developed around traditional horse-drawn vehicles or railroads, and their growth was usually hard, steady, and finite. LA was a 20th century city and the first metropolis to come of age with the automobile as its primary means of transportation. With 500 square miles filled with roads, LA had plenty of leeway and the city boomed. Hollywood was part of that boom. The mere mention of its name made headlines blossom quicker than any other city in the world. Hollywood set itself apart from the rest of the world and made everything seem larger than life. It was an easy mark and seemingly ceaseless fountain of inspiration for writers. With the onset of Prohibition, problems increased. A dry city was still a thirsty city, and one that had to be supplied, and plenty of hoodlums bribed local law enforcers to place a keg or case into the right hands. Culver City, the, quote, heart of Screenland, was case in point. Home to MGM and a host of other studios, its main drag, Washington Boulevard, was a hotbed of speakeasies, gin joints, roadhouses, and cafes. Film money and the town's open reputation brought crowds to back rooms filled with gambling, bookmaking, and prostitution. The city soon built a racetrack, boxing ring, and dog racing arena, all magnets for hoodlums. With direct access to Pacific Coast rum runners and local stills, the town was afloat in illegal booze. The Culver City Police Department was notorious for looking the other way, losing evidence, and bungling raids so that crime went undisturbed. Gangs and crime bosses knew a good thing when they saw it and came crawling across the country to set up shop. Bootleggers such as Tony Cornero, Dominic DiCiola, and Albert Marco controlled the business. Vice Lords Guy McAfee, Nola Hahn, Jack Dragna, and Bob Gans commandeered their turf, laying claim to numbers rackets, prostitution, gambling, and slot machines. They were local hoodlums, and they liked it that way in return for a bit of profit sharing. The local police were expected to protect them from the East Coast concerns muscling in on their territory. When Al Capone came calling in 1927, he was met by a couple of detectives and a vocal chief of detectives who made it clear that the welcome mat wasn't out. Rumor had it Capone was scouting a seacoast ranch to serve as a drop point for Canadian liquor. After a visit from the cops, he headed back to Chicago, ending his California vacation. It would be a few more years until real East Coast muscle dropped an anchor in the city of Los Angeles. The cops could be counted on for more than just keeping East Coast gangsters at bay. The linchpin of police corruption was Chief of Police James Two Gun Davis. He and his City Hall cronies made sure LA remained safe in return for bribes and graft, which escalated in the 1920s and 1930s to a wholesale spoils system. Their regime culminated in 1938 with the car bombing of private investigator Harry Raymond, an ex-LAPD detective who was in the process of exposing the corruption. The bombers were traced back to LAPD's intelligence squad, and the ensuing public outrage ousted Mayor Frank Shaw, while Chief Davis, along with 23 of his fellow officers, were forced to resign. End quote. That's a great article. We will link to it in our sources. As always, it's super comprehensive. It covers decades of LA history, doesn't it? It's a good one.
So good.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking more about Chief Davis soon enough. But yeah, so this is what is going on in LA around the same time that Walter Collins went missing.
Christine can finally make the missing persons report, and now the police starts to look into it. I don't know how serious they took it, but I read that because of the kidnapping and murder of a 12-year-old girl in December of 1927, so that's only a couple of months sooner, the citizens of LA were in fact kind of sensitive to the case of Walter Collins.
Are you talking, about the murder of Marion Parker?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think that case it's sad and it's really brutal? I don't know. I mean, let us know if you want us to cover that case, because that one is, that's bad.
Bad one, yeah. I mean, they all are. Always the ones with the kids are. I mean,
that one is particularly shocking, though. The Marion Parker case, it's a bad one.
Now, the citizens of LA and actually all over California are on the lookout for Walter. And tips are coming in. He has been seen here, he has been seen there, even in San Francisco and Oakland. One article I read mentions a very bizarre sighting. So someone apparently called and stated they had seen Walter at a gas station outside of LA. And he was sitting in the back of a car, which doesn't sound too bizarre, right? But they claimed that his whole body was wrapped in newspaper and that they could only see his head. They also stated that Walter was in the company of an, quote, Italian-looking man, end quote, and a woman. And I think we will post a photo of the article in our Facebook album.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it says that the body is wrapped in newspapers. It's that other case that it's so bad.
Searchers also drag lakes and, other bodies of water to look for Walter. This also reminds me, only 2 days after Walter had disappeared, so on 12th of March 1928, the St. Francis Dam that was situated northwest of LA collapsed, which caused more than 400 fatalities. Okay, so they were looking for Walter. Walter's father, who was at Folsom Prison, had a theory of his own. He believed it to be possible that he had made some enemies inside the prison and that his son was actually targeted and that it was not a coincidental kidnapping. But the leads took them nowhere. Months passed and no sign of Walter until one day in August, the police contacts Christine Collins and they tell her they found her son and he is alive and well. A boy claiming to be Walter Collins from LA was found in DeKalb, Illinois.
Yeah, and that's a jaunt. That's 2,000 miles east, 3,220 kilometers east of LA. That's a hike. And it's not really the police that found Walter. It's Walter who found the police. So while in DeKalb, he ran into Sheriff Helena Dolder. And you had told me she inherited that position from her husband, because I was like, wait, am I looking at this right? Is this, there was a lady sheriff. You let a woman hold a gun?
I love this kind of things when we get into a case and it's these little details that are so interesting.
It is. Okay, so he finds Sheriff Dolder. He tells her that he is Walter Collins and that he is trying to get home. And so Helena contacts LAPD, and LAPD contacted Christine, and a phone call was set up so that Christine could speak to her son personally. And she did that, and then she paid $70 in order to get him a train ticket back to Los Angeles.
Is it just me, or does this seem like kind of a lot? $70?
No,
back then.
This is why I think we talk so frequently in terms of like horse money or carpet money, or it's because some things it seems like it makes sense with the way inflation works, and then other things it just, I don't know. Because when I looked, it seems like the inflation calculator from $70 from 1928 would be the same purchasing power of a little over $1,100 today. And that seems...
But it's still a lot, right? I mean, if it's... That must be for more than just a train ticket.
Yes. Yes, it has to be, because I looked it up, because like you, I was like, that's not right. So I just got on Amtrak and I looked it up, and it was, this sounds like a fucking nightmare, but if you were so inclined, you could spend 43 hours in a seat on a train and go direct from Chicago to LA for about $150. So that's actually really reasonable. And totally something I'd have done in my 20s. But now, if you were to get like a room where they have like the 2 bunks so you can actually lay down and sleep during your 2-day journey, it's like $700 for the basic one. So if that was $1,100 of purchasing power today, again, like you said, there must have been a second. I wonder if there was a guardian.
Yeah, there was. Yeah.
You know, maybe to bring him back.
But still, I think it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's definitely a lot. I feel like you could buy a house for that back then. It's really hard to do those sums. But regardless, we're sure that Christine would have paid anything and was just happy to have her son back home, right? So the big day arrives. Christine gets to the train station to welcome her son. The police are there, as are the press. Everyone is so happy because after 5 months, this case is finally closed and they actually have a happy ending. I really hope you can't hear Opus. He just walked into the room behind me to be closer to me with the bone I gave him to keep him quiet and just thonked down pretty hard. So hopefully you won't hear any chomping, but if you do, it's my dog. All right. So the train arrives and Christine is beside herself. She's ready to hug Walter. But the train door opens and out walks the boy, and she looks up and she is just utterly confused because that child is not her son Walter. And she tells the police who are there that, listen, who is this? This is not my son. They're like, oh, sorry, bit of a mix-up there. Let's get you refunded your money. No, that's not what happens. They don't believe her. They say that he clearly has changed a lot in the last 5 months, and who knows what he's been through, and that she is clearly mistaken, and she should take the boy home with her, and she will soon enough realize that this is her son.
We talked about something similar in the Pauline Picard case, but remember with Pauline Picard it was quite different because her parents actually really believed that they had found their child. But Christine Collins was pretty certain that this was not Walter.
Yeah, and can I just say how terrifying this would be, kind of, I think? Yeah. Because he's a kid, but he's like that age where he's old enough to hurt you. You know, they're big enough to physically harm you if they wanted to, and now there's an absolute stranger staring at you, and you're going to take him home. Because, of course, Christine caves, and she takes him home. She must have been under just tremendous pressure. The media were there. The police are telling her, no, this is your child. Plus, of course, you want it to be your child. And also, what are you going to do? Tell this other actual child who's traveled all this way, like, sorry, you're on your own? Of course not. You know your child is out there somewhere and you hope they would take care of, it's...
I mean, yeah, of course, but also nowadays you would call what the police did gaslighting.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it was not only Christine who desperately wanted her son home. The LAPD desperately needed this case to be solved and without another dead child. They thought this would help their reputation for the better.
This whole situation is...
so fucked up.
It's, yeah, totally foobar. So Christine takes Walter... not Walter, home. And this kid too. And this is the part that for me, this would be very creepy because the kid is saying, you're my mommy, you're my mother. And she still doesn't buy it because she knows this is not her kid. I mean,
Can you imagine?
No, because also, not only are you being sort of gaslit by the police and the media and all of this, you've got now a stranger child coming into your home. And where the hell is your kid? Because you woke up thinking this whole nightmare was behind you, and now where is your kid? So police successfully convinced her that she can't trust her own eyes and her maternal instinct is off. And she asks other people, do they think this is Walter? And there are a lot of doubts, like his friends and his teachers. It seems like everyone was like, no, we don't think this is Walter. This whole situation, it just seems, it's you get why they made a movie about it. And also, this Walter is 2 whole inches shorter than before the disappearance. A 9-year-old is not going to be 2 inches shorter after 5 months, right? I mean, if he was 3 or 4 inches taller and had, grown out of his shoes, then I'd be like, that could still be your kid, lady. But shorter?
I mean, he's not 42. That's where the shrinking is in full swing. And nowadays, I'm only my original size when I get up in the morning. If I'm at all at my original size nowadays.
I'm like almost 3 inches shorter because of the arthritis in my back. But yeah, the kids, no, it goes the other way. She also says that the ears are different, that Walter has the ears of her family's ears. And I don't know if she means her family or her husband's family, because if you look at a picture of Walter Sr. and a picture of Walter Jr., they do seem to have similar ears.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah, because there's also that thing where whether your earlobes are attached or detached, you know what I mean? There are certain ear characteristics that are hereditary. Yeah. And also, and this is, I mean, really, after this, just game over. Game over, man. She takes the boy to the dentist, which is brilliant, right? Because he can actually compare Walter's dental records to this Walter, to not Walter, to see if something is different. And there is. The dentist is absolutely 100% positively certain this boy is not Walter Collins, because Walter Collins had several fillings. This boy now had never even seen a dentist. Also, Walter's front teeth had a wide gap. The eyes were different as well. Walter was very neat, and this boy was messy. Walter loved to read. This boy showed no interest in books. I mean, we could go on and on about not Walter. It's just not Walter. And so Christine marches into the office of the lead detective who is working her case, Captain J.J. Jones, and she is armed with the dental records and the statements of the people who knew Walter, and she tells him, this is not my son. I have this and this and this as proof, and I am telling you, this is not Walter. Something along those lines. And then Jones responds, the audacity, I am telling you that this is your son. He's telling you he's your son, so you're a fool or you're a bad mother. Like, honest to God. So he's insinuating she's either trying to make a fool out of the LAPD or she's trying to get rid of her son by stating this isn't him.
This is where the infuriating part really starts to be. Do you think he truly believed that this was Walter? Because I have the feeling that he knew damn well that something was not right when she showed up with the dental work.
Oh, yeah,
That's the latest point where he would have to know there's something not right there.
Yeah, I think they just wanted everything to go away. I think that's all they cared about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Christine keeps insisting that this is not her son, and now something happens which is... you might want to hold onto your seat, maybe, or hug your pet, but carefully. Not too tight, because this is truly shocking and you don't want to scare your pet. So, because Christine keeps insisting that this is not her Walter, she gets arrested and is committed to the Los Angeles County General Hospital's psychiatric ward under a so-called Code 12 internment for evaluation. In reality, the Code 12 was a term used by the police when they arrested someone or had them committed simply for being difficult or an annoyance to them. There could be so many reasons for a Code 12. The LAPD could state whatever reason. Whatever they wanted to say, it was a reason for a Code 12. And once in the psych ward, what chance did you really have to get out? And there's a scene in Changeling. It's really heartbreaking, actually, because one of the other women at the psych ward tells Christine that no matter how she acts, it will be a reason for them to keep her there. So you are either hysterical, or you are too emotional, or you are too apathetic. And interestingly enough, only a couple of days ago, I read an article about the practice where women, wives and daughters, were committed to psych wards and asylums by their families for being difficult, which could be any reason, from being depressed, being homosexual, or simply because you wanted a divorce. So that's, yeah. don't worry. After 5 days, Christine could leave the hospital thanks to a Reverend Gustav Briegleb. So Reverend Briegleb was not only the minister at an LA Presbyterian church that was located on Jefferson Boulevard and 3rd Avenue. And I googled it and I saw that the church still exists, but also a radio evangelist. So his sermons would be broadcasted on the radio, and he was well known in LA for being very, very critical of the LAPD. And he helped in a lot of cases that involved mishandling and misconduct by the police of Los Angeles. And when he heard about the Collins case, he too wanted to help. And he actually managed to get Christine released. And guess what? Something else happened only a couple of days later. Finally, the true identity of fake Walter Collins came to light. The boy finally confessed that he was in fact 12-year-old Arthur J. Hutchins Jr. from Iowa. The boy's mother had died in 1925 and he lived with his father and stepmother. Decades later, Arthur's stepbrother would tell in an interview that Arthur was considered to be the black sheep of the family and that he was always getting into a lot of trouble at 11 or 12. But according to Arthur himself, he did have some problems with his stepmother, so he ran away and survived by taking the odd job now and then. And somehow he made it to DeKalb, and there someone told him that he looked an awful lot like the missing boy from LA. And Arthur, being a child, really wanted to go to LA to see his favorite actor because he was really into cowboy movies. And he figured that if he said he was Walter Collins, he could go to LA for free. And from there, he kind of winged everything, and I think the police, gave little hints here and there, not on purpose, but by accident.
Sure, yeah.
And I think Arthur had a really sad home life. According to an article in the DeKalb Daily Chronicle from 22nd of September 1928, titled, "Father Goes to West Coast to Get Lost Son." Quote, Arthur Hutchins of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, left Cedar Rapids last night for Los Angeles, California to bring back his son, Arthur Hutchins Jr., who was taken from this city to California in August as Walter Collins, a Los Angeles boy, missing since last spring. The father is a railroad man at Cedar Rapids and said that his son left home because he could not get along with his stepmother. End quote. And then in the Provo, Utah Daily Herald from 3rd of October 1928, which I find also kind of sad, is, quote, "There was no display of emotion when young Hutchins and Mrs. Hutchins met. He said, quote, 'Hello, Mama,' end quote, and she answered, quote, 'Hello, Arthur,' end quote, and that was all." And before he left California, they also asked him about, why he was pretending to be a kidnapped boy and fooling the mother of a kidnapped boy, and Arthur just shrugged and he answered, quote, "She was nice to me and it's fun to be somebody you aren't," end quote.
I mean, no lies detected.
Once Arthur was back in Iowa, he was sent to reform school, the Iowa Training School for Boys in Eldora, and he died in 1952 at the age of 35. He had met his younger half-brother only once when the sibling was around 6 years old. That was the one who said, he was always the black sheep of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we can say, what a horrible child he must have been to cause so much pain to a mother looking for her son. But I also think that he had probably a very sad and loveless childhood after his mother's death.
Yeah.
I don't want to justify his actions, but he was a child. And I do blame the police, but he was a child.
I'm not blaming a literal child for trying to survive a bad situation. You know what I mean? And he was a child. Also, the people of LA blamed the police for this. Everybody blamed the police for this, and really rightly so, especially when they heard that Christine, the mother of a missing child, had spent 5 days locked in a psych ward for the crime of insisting the police had brought her the wrong boy. I know. It was a huge scandal. The LAPD already had a bad reputation, and this was, well, Johanna, this is the straw that broke the camel's
I know.
toes. All the toes were broken with this one. So Christine Collins filed a complaint against the city of LA, Chief James E. Two Guns Davis, and Captain J.J. Jones. And so more than 1,000 of the good people of Los Angeles tried to get into the council chambers at City Hall in order to witness the testimonies of Christine Collins, Chief Davis, and Captain Jones. Jones was suspended, but could return to the force pretty soon afterward. And this comes from the Los Angeles Evening Post Record, Los Angeles, California, August 10th, 1929. Offender only suspended. Quote, Davis didn't fire Jones altogether, although he had the power to do so. He merely suspended Jones to appease aroused public opinion. During the outburst of public sentiment against the Cossack-minded Jones, another complaint against his conduct was revealed by a Mrs. F.H. Schremp. Mrs. Schremp charged that she appealed to Jones for aid in a case involving her 6-year-old daughter, who was the supposed victim of a man who faced statutory charges. Mrs. Schremp charged that Captain Jones, quite, whitewashed the man and refused to order an examination of the girl believed to have been attacked. She declared Captain Jones talked insultingly to her, charging she was not married, and telling her that she was a fine woman to be making such a complaint. At City Council's investigation into the way Chief of Police James E. Davis conducted himself in whitewashing Captain Jones, Councilman Virgil A. Martin presented a resolution asking for a full investigation of the dismissal and later reinstatement of Davis in 1911 for, quote, conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, end quote. All vital records of the dismissal of Davis were, quote, unquote, missing, Martin said. In the end, City Council asked that Davis be removed as Chief of Police and that the suspension of Captain J.J. Jones be made permanent. I mean, if you're permanently suspended, aren't you just fired? Anyway, sorry, it continues. The fight for justice and a complete airing of the Cossack methods of the police department continued and is still a live question today. James E. Davis is still Chief of Police. J.J. Jones is still on the police force, now working as a detective lieutenant. Attorney Hahn is still fighting for financial redress for Mrs. Christine Collins, who was thrown into a psychopathic ward because a bull-headed policeman thought he knew more about her own child than she knew. End quote.
I love the last sentence.
I mean, seriously, though. He
sounds like a complete asshole.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some people like positions of power for the power.
Yeah.
That's it. Later, in a civil lawsuit that lasted 2 years, Christine Collins was awarded $10,800, which she wanted to use the money to search for her son, Walter. Unfortunately, J.J. Jones never paid the sum that he owed to Christine, even though he returned to work for the LAPD, because somehow he always managed to be broke.
I think they covered for him. Like, there must have been... He must have had a good income as a detective lieutenant.
Yeah, especially with him working, because I know, like, OJ's never paid a dime, right, to the Brown or Simpson families.
I hate this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I was advised not to try to sue the woman who killed my late husband for the same reason. They said you'll bankrupt yourself trying to make a difference and you'll never see a penny. Just don't put yourself through it.
Sad.
Yeah. So I think this is probably a good place to stop for today. There is so much more to talk about, but it's going to have to wait for next week. And that's when we are going to be discussing the Wineville chicken coop murders. It's bad stuff. Something good? Have you seen the original BBC series Ghosts?
No.
You should watch it. We have been having quite a laugh. There are several actors and actresses that you recognize. It's a good cast. You can hear my dog whining in the key of migraine. I spent all of last week with the migraine, just like day after day. Check out Ghosts. It's this couple that end up with this. You'll feel better about your own renovations. It's like they're renovating, but then they're surrounded by all these ghosts from different eras. And so far, it's been really, really funny. And then I spent most of last week, unfortunately, I had a migraine every day. Not consecutively. I'd have gone to the hospital if that were the case, but it'd be like you'd wake up with one and then get rid of it by nighttime, and then you'd be okay in the morning and then get one the next afternoon. It was just... We had a big storm here, so we canceled. We didn't do anything for our anniversary. We canceled our plans, but also happy anniversary to my most beloved husband. So, yeah.
My something good is a hand mirror that I bought. This sounds so trivial, but I was very happy because there is this British company and they sell beautiful vintage brushes and hand mirrors and vanity sets and ashtrays and whatnot, and they're all very unique. And they always announce when they're gonna put on new stuff onto their web shop. And I've been trying for almost a year to grab one of those mirrors. And they're sold out in a couple of minutes.
Like immediately.
And this time I was online 5 minutes before they put all the stuff on it. And I grabbed exactly the one that I wanted to have, that I have my eye on. And it's beautiful. I'm gonna use it for our next makeup video. I love it.
Yay. I love it.
So that made me happy. That's my something good.
That is something good. All right. What else?
If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, our whole podcast possibly, please do us the huge favor and go on to your podcast app and check if you can leave us a rating and or review. It really makes our day and it also helps us out a lot.
It really does, yeah. And if you're on YouTube, then please like and subscribe. I think that's what we're supposed to say, right? Like and subscribe, please. And come say hello to us. You can find our Facebook group by searching Fresh Hell Podcast Murder, and it's a really, really wonderful group. We hope to see you there. You can also find all our other information on our website, which is freshhellpodcast.com. That's where you're going to find links to merchandise, our Patreon if you want to support us in that way. You can also, of course, go to patreon.com and search for Fresh Hell Podcast.
Yes, and please tell all your pets we said hi. Sometimes they can be so annoying. Demanding.
Opus.
There you go.
Yeah.
Case in point. But at the end of the day, they are the ones who keep you warm in the middle of the night when they crawl under your blanket and roll up next to you, which Jam always does. And as we are renovating, our house is really cold at the moment, and he keeps me warm. And I love him for that.
Yes. Opus did a full Sphinx on me yesterday. I was on my back, and he did a full, he was sitting down on top of me with his, tush in between my legs, and paws on either side of my face, just looking down on me. And I couldn't move. I was completely pinned. I had 120 pounds of dog on me, and I was just like, okay, there are worse ways to go. It's fine. But yeah, we love him. Tell him we said hi. And you know what we're going to say. If you, like us, are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.